In all of nature's grand chronicles of flight and expedition, creatures adorned with magnificent, wide wings seem born to confront the fiercest air currents. Humanity always presumes that their ultimate destiny is an endless, transoceanic migration. Yet, as the final afterglow upon the coastal cliffs was diluted by the encroaching night, and the ancient orchards of the Mediterranean coast surged into a sea of pristine white blossoms under the moonlight, a single creature made the most anomalous choice. Rather than journeying day and night with his massive swarm toward the warm southern shores, he chose to separate from the flock alone, gently descending into the sheltered low branches of a wind-swept orange tree, letting the cool sea breeze brush against his large, black-veined wings. Tonight, by the gentle, dancing glow of the hearth, let us immerse ourselves in this tale that requires no effort to remember, and wander together into the true chronicle of his life. This tree nymph butterfly was known to the watchman of the estate as Agaz. He was once the champion of the migrating fleet, bearing the most powerful wings and the steadiest flight, his former life originally nothing less than a rigorous expedition of precisely calculating wind direction and endurance. Yet at this very moment, he merely nestles in absolute stillness deep within the center of a blooming, flawless white-orange blossom. He no longer resists the condensation brought by the cold night air, and no longer seeks to prove that he can conquer that temperamental, boundless ocean. His life did not follow a mundane script toward a tragic end of collapsing into the sea from utter exhaustion. Instead, with an exquisitely elegant, weightless, and profoundly secure posture, wrapped in a vintage European aroma of bittersweet tranquility, he softly drifted into an eternal sleep. This is by no means a tragic straying filled with regret, but rather a grand harbor of the soul he had long contemplated and willingly embraced, a midnight parable of releasing anxiety, healing tension, and returning to absolute silence. The fractures of destiny often manifest at the very zenith of celebrated glory. For Agaz, it occurred on a scorching afternoon over the French Riviera when he encountered a violent headwind. In those days, Agaz possessed the most flawless black and white patterned wings in his entire colony. When unfurled, his wings resembled luxurious silk, effortlessly capturing the most minute shifts in air currents. He was a born aviator. The order of migration was absolute and merciless. Every individual was bound to obey the dictates embedded deep within their genetics, flying at sunrise, resting at sunset, relentlessly exhausting their vital reserves between long and monotonous coastlines. Agaz had once devoutly revered this grand narrative of the faraway, believing that the entire purpose of existence was distilled into leading his swarm across turbulent straits, journeying toward that promised shore where winter never comes. Until that day, amidst a sudden oceanic cyclone, when he strove to protect several young companions from being swept by ferocious gales into the freezing water, forcing himself to beat his wings with frantic fury against the very core of the tempest. It was a high-stakes duel with death. Massive mist kicked up by the crashing waves repeatedly battered his delicate wings, and violent fluctuations in air pressure acted like giant, invisible hands, attempting to tear his fragile body into shards. The sunlight, refracted by the pervasive moisture, became blindingly harsh. The air was thick with the briny bitterness of sea salt and the aching soreness of an overexerted physical frame, locking him tightly to the edge of despair. Agaz ultimately reached safety, leading his fleet out of the cyclone and landing within the ancient estate orchard on the Mediterranean coast for a brief, stolen interlude of rest. Yet, as he hovered utterly spent upon a glossy leaf of a tall bitter orange tree, no surge of triumphant pride filled his heart. Instead, he was met by an overwhelming, tidal wave of emptiness and numbness. Looking down, he saw that the borders of his prized, magnificent wings were marred by several microfissures beyond repair, while his vital essence, fanatically depleted for the sake of duty, had run completely dry. At that exact moment, as the scorching yet weary sun beat down on his cold form, Agaz experienced an unprecedented, stinging ache, not of physical trauma, but the fracture of the grand belief that had sustained the first half of his life, splitting wide open in this quiet orchard. Following that post-storm respite, the days in the estate orchard shifted into entirely different hues through Agaz's compound eyes. Those old obsessions with the faraway shore now appeared utterly hollow and heavy. Every morning, as the first salt-tinged rays of dawn pierced the Mediterranean mists, thousands of his peers beat their wings in unison, a dense drone driving every soul into a fresh cycle of migratory rush. Agaz deliberately lagged at the absolute rear of the swarms, flying slower and slower. Watching his comrades plunge into the rocky debris along the way from blindly chasing speed, an immense wave of desolation washed over him. His physical frame still projected the proud stature of a leader, but his soul felt as though it had been scattered by that storm. He no longer desired to wage an unavailing war against the merciless air currents, he began to crave cessation. The discipline within his colony was invisible yet unforgiving. Stragglers or those who failed to ascend high enough were ruthlessly abandoned to the cold night. No one would halt their forward march for the sake of a weakened soul. Agas began to deliberately shun those high-altitude channels where the air currents raged fiercest. Instead, he frequented the moss-covered stone carvings and bitter orange trees as twilight fell. The bitter orange trees here had clearly endured for ages, their dense boughs growing wide and long. In this season of transition between midsummer and early autumn, they bore golden fruits alongside newly opened, snow-white, delicate petals. During his low, solitary hoverings, he began to notice details he had once blindly bypassed. He came to understand the rhythmic, hypnotic cadence of distant waves crashing against cliffs, and felt the delicate weight of moonlight resting upon his antennae. He formed a silent understanding with a pristine white orange blossom blooming beside a wrought iron gate. Unhurried and unpretentious, it exhaled a vintage fragrance, crisp green, slightly bitter, yet infinitely sweet, capable of soothing the shifting spirit. Whenever Agas landed weary and laden with anxiety upon its sepals in the dying rays of dusk, the flower would gracefully spread its thick, succulent white petals, tenderly enveloping his battle-scarred, magnificent wings within its core. Within this micro-world devoid of direction, where only absolution remained, Agas had no need to bear the burden of leading his colony. Cradled within this relaxing aroma favored by European nobility, he simply rediscovered the true, safe rhythm of his own breath. Autumn nights by the Mediterranean always harbor an irresistible, gentle magic. The cool sea breeze swept away the residual heat of the daytime, infusing the atmosphere with the weightless purity of vegetation veering toward sleep. To the tree nymph colony, the hour of ultimate departure had arrived at last. With a freezing cold current sweeping down from the north, they were bound to harness the strongest seasonal gales tonight to complete their final voyage across the strait. It was the most silent night the estate had ever known. The moon appeared impossibly grand, its pristine silver illumination bathing the entire orchard as though a layer of flawless snow had fallen, while the distant rhythm of the tide rose and fell with a dull, tender murmur. Agas lay in perfect stillness at the center of his familiar white flower, watching countless piers gather in the sky to form a black and white patterned river. Flying resolutely under the moon toward that broad ocean thick with perils and the unknown. The leader broadcasted a high signal into the air, urging this former navigator to reassume his place at the vanguard and fulfill his duty against the tempests, yet Agas's wings remained, in this sacred hour, unprecedentedly serene. He witnessed the zeal flickering in his comrade's eyes, a fervor born of intense anxiety for the future, and looked down at the flower beneath him, an orange blossom of royal dignity exhaling an anti-anxiety magic beneath the lunar sea breeze. He made the most serene, incomprehensible decision of his life. He slowly folded his immense wings, burying his antennae and legs deep within the oil-rich filaments. At that exact instant, the orange blossom fragrance peaked in intensity as it was activated by the night dew, a perfume rich with crisp green notes and a noble woody undertone, turning into an airtight sanctuary that shielded him completely. The distant cries of his colony gradually dissolved into the roaring tide and high winds, until the entire expeditionary fleet vanished completely over the horizon, leaving this rebellious navigator entirely alone within the moonlit orchard. Stripped of the pressure of regimentation and the demands of duty, Agas perched within this pristine core forgotten by the world, listening to his gradually slowing heartbeat, experiencing a sublime freedom he had never known since birth. Midnight brought a hush so profound it felt as though time itself had ceased to spin, as the Mediterranean breeze combed through the interlocking branches of the orchard. It was filtered into the most tender, weightless whisper, generating a soft rustling murmur. Agas rested in perfect stillness within the innermost depths of the blossom, where the temperature was perfectly mild and comforting. Juices infused with the scent of sweet apple and orange zest traveled through the filaments, silently nurturing his tightly wound soul. He gently loosened his delicate legs, discovering that those muscles, which had once grown stiff and spasmed from gripping leaves fiercely in the gale, had completely relaxed amidst the velvet softness of the petals. Had this occurred in his past life during the expeditions, such absolute surrender would signify a fatal descent, an open invitation to be torn apart by predatory forces or swallowed unceremoniously by the tide. But here, resting within the embrace of the ancient bitter orange flower famed for its anti-anxiety remedies, deep within this estate cut off from the noise of the world, all dangers, duties, and fears dissolved into nothingness. He no longer needed to force his wings just to validate his raw strength to his peers, nor did he have to deplete his essence for that illusory shore where winter never comes. His social identity was stripped away in this sacred hour. He was no longer a navigator carrying the burdensome mandate of his colony. He was merely a pure life form within this white palace fashioned from petals, quietly savoring warmth and absolute security amidst the bittersweet breath of Neroli. The ancient blossom gleamed with its final luster in the night breeze, its noble aroma, capable of directly tranquilizing tightly wounded nerves, turning into thousands of tender dreams, smoothing away all mental clutter touch by touch. He slowly closed his compound eyes, burying his body deep between the scattered anthers, letting the hypnotic cadence woven by the sea wind and blossom scent steal away the last of his waking consciousness, dissolving into boundless serenity. As the first pristine glint of dawn, bearing the characteristic clarity of the Mediterranean, pierced through the morning mist, it scattered flakes of spun gold across the orange groves. A new day arrived precisely on schedule, the world spinning on in absolute elegance. Deep within the heart of that pristine orange blossom beside the wrought iron gate, Agaz lay in perfect stillness. His magnificent, patterned wings no longer stirred, upon them, a few perfect beads of morning dew had gathered, glistening with a final radiance under the early light. As a few gentle sea breezes swept past, several ivory petals fulfilled their sacred duty. They detached softly from the calyx and drifted downward under the pull of gravity, meticulously blanketing the butterfly's miniature, beautifully loose form. He did not perish upon the merciless ocean amidst unexpected storms, nor was he reduced to dust within the rocky debris along a lonely migration route. Cradled by the most tender, noble sanctuary, he completed his most serene valediction to this world. The enigma of why he chose to withdraw at his most celebrated hour, remaining alone within the moonlit orchard, would never be understood by his peers in the distance. They would merely employ the cold logic of natural selection to footnote his departure. Yet to this ancient estate, and to that specific aroma of orange blossom that had kept him company through the dead of night, Agaz had left behind a secretive, epic ballad of surrender, of deep healing, and of discovering the true peace within. Through his ultimate choice, he proved to a clamorous world that the grandest nobility in life is sometimes not how many distant oceans you conquer with powerful wings, but having the courage, at the perfect moment, to permit oneself to stop. The breeze swept through the orchard branches once more, and the weightless, relaxing fragrance of Neroli lingered beautifully in the air, carrying away all residual anxiety and weariness, leaving behind a crystalline, perfect hush. Now, this tale of the duel between expedition and cessation has reached its destination, and that fragrance of orange blossom, laden with the temperature of the Mediterranean evening breeze, seems to be drifting softly into your fingertips, melting against your pillow. The world outside has surrendered to an absolute hush. Relinquish all attachments, all defenses, and all heavy burdens. Like the great tree nymph butterfly who found his destination within the pristine white flower, let yourself drift into a peaceful, deep, and heavy sleep.